Hi there, and welcome to Central Texas Gardener. I'm Tom Spencer. I know lots of people who never considered gardening until they noticed a special plant that first time and fell in love with it. As you well know, one plant leads to another until you're looking for more room for your latest passions. Today, Scott Ogden and Lauren Springer Ogden explain their philosophy behind plant-driven design and why this first connection creates the best gardens. On tour, they illustrate how their passion for plants comes together here at home in Austin.
Against up-close traffic commotion, Scott Ogden and Lauren Springer Ogden temper urban necessity with botanical exploration that represents nature's harvests from around the world. As gardeners, designers, and authors, every site, including their home in Austin, depicts their philosophy of plant-driven design.
For us, I think the beginning of all this is actually looking at nature and looking at other gardens. And so we both spent a lot of time hiking through the hills, wandering along creeks, and looking at old neighborhoods and plants that grow, seeing what happens. And then we've spent time with the plants themselves, and that's the beginning of being able to create a garden, is knowing how the plants grow, knowing what they do in the wild, and being able to bring a little bit of that into your own environment.
When you accept that that really is a relationship between you, a living being, and another living being, it's completely different. And it allows for so much more complexity and change and excitement and surprise and disappointment and all that.
As plant-driven gardeners, Lauren and Scott absorb what each one says to them. In their experiments, they welcome the challenge of communication to respond to the needs of their international partners.
A plant-driven garden, or a garden that's designed with plants first, you don't have to have a lot of money. You don't have to have gone to school and learned all the quote-unquote tenets of design, which we don't believe in anyway. And it just comes with loving certain plants, loving the way they look, and thinking about where would they look best in the garden with what other plants.
That's the thing that really separates a plant-driven design garden from another garden, is that the plants are what is first in mind when you lay it out.
Most important thing I'd say would be that you love it. I want there to be a love affair.
Although they consider whether the passion will be reciprocal, a plan sketch on paper doesn't work for them.
We have a really, really full garden and very layered garden, mainly because we don't have enough room. And so we have to do the fruitcake thing. So
we want it all.
It's a vertical effect. It's 3D gardening, you know?
To be honest, this garden is barely designed. It's stuffed with plants, and one of the few design features is the sedge lawn, and the reason it's here is because we knew it was going to be stuffed with plants everywhere else, and we had to have some kind of quiet place for your eye to rest, so we could have lots of plants and where we could walk. Exactly.
But since they're sensitive to how plants best cohabitate, rhythms of design naturally emerge. Some plants get the job as evergreen structure in diverse foliar renditions.
But they would be inert if we didn't have bulbs shooting through periodically after a rainstorm or in the spring.
That's right.
Or having a few kind of feathery perennials or annuals that come and bloom and then we whack them back and they disappear. Those kind of things have to happen to keep the garden exciting. Gardening is about curiosity and it's about change. A garden that's perfect all the time is a bore. Who wants that? You might as well be at a parking lot in the mall. You actually want to be able to go out the door and see something different, every week, if not every day.
The main reason you want change in the garden is it's human nature, really. If everything looks the same, you actually start to not see it.
In Texas, where plants gently unfold year-round, plant-driven design simmers and anticipates rather than bursting into simultaneous passion.
So you have what's basically sort of a sputtering of different types of plants that have their seasons. So if you don't think about seasonality and plants that come and go, you will have basically a plastic garden. One year there'll be one spot in your garden where there's 3 things that all bloom at the same time and they all look super together, and then it may never happen again. And you know, you have to be okay with unpredictability and okay with the fact that things do die and look awful often, and it's not your fault, but there's so many things that do wonderful things that you can't take credit for either.
Part of it is, real plants, like real people, aren't perfect.
When someone asked why their Clematis armandii was free of spent brown leaves, Scott responded, "Lauren picked them off."
And people forget gardens don't exist without gardening. If you don't want to garden, you will never have a real garden. The other thing that's important is to get over the idea of a garden as an installation project. That's once it's done, it's done. It's never done.
I don't think everyone needs to have a layered garden or even a naturalistically modeled garden. It's really not about whether it's formal or informal or whether it's overstuffed like our garden or whether it's a little more sparse. But the main thing is that you have plants that you really enjoy.
Well, you just met them in their incredibly exuberant garden, and now they're joining us in the studios to celebrate the release of their new book, Scott Ogden and Lauren Springer Ogden. It's a pleasure to have you on the set here at Central Texas Gardener, and congratulations. This is it's an exquisite book to look at, first off. And I think it's going to be a very challenging book for a lot of folks out there as well. It will certainly get them thinking about their gardens in a completely new way. And I know that was the intent. You're very passionate about what you do.
We both are, and we felt, when we were going to do it, we don't do too many books. Mm-hmm. When we're going to do it, we want to, kind of do something serious about it and significant. And so this one, we had some stuff on our chest we needed to get off. Basically, that we felt like gardens, as they've become popularized in kind of popular culture, are drifting away from their roots, and their roots are about a relationship with plants.
Okay. Well, you in the videotape piece, you talk about having this love relationship with plants, which is the starting place for you both. I mean, I know that you are both consummate plants people, but there's beyond that love relationship that you talk about in the piece, there's this frustration that you have with the way the gardens now are created, Lauren, and you really, it's like a kind of a, I don't know, is it a cookie cutter approach that you object to, or is it, what is it that frustrates you about kind of the state of gardens in our country right now?
Well, cookie cutter for sure, but I think it's more that the whole instant garden thing, that you can do a garden like you do your living room and it's done.
Yeah.
And also that really for us, and we are more intense about it than a lot of people. We don't expect everybody to delve into it in a professional level or an obsessive level, but to have a garden means also to be involved with the living things that are in your garden, and that's the joy. And that's what's missing.
And it's particularly missing from the world of design. So most of the people who entitle themselves to talk about design when it comes to gardens are kind of hands-off afterwards. They miss the whole idea that this is a relationship that you're involved in over a period of time.
So really this is about connection for you guys in a very profound kind of way. Connection with not just the individual plants, but plant communities and the interaction of all these things, how they work together.
It is, and it's about creating beautiful spaces with the plants as the starting point for that. So that when you actually lay things out, you already have in mind where these plants will be able to do their best. You can help modify those spaces to make that happen. It's something that's left out of so much of the common landscape architecture that's you see all around, either, whether it's for a public space or private gardens, very often leaves out those special places that really will show off a plant to its best.
I know a lot of gardeners out there who are really passionate. I read a lot of garden blogs now, and there are people who rant about what they call magazine perfect gardens. And I know that you have a bone to pick with one of the leading garden design magazines here in the country for that very same kind of reason, I think.
Yeah, well, I look at some of the magazines and I look at these very beautiful images, but they aren't gardens. The plants are relegated to totally subordinate positions, and the pictures are beautiful, but there isn't anything that you feel about that particular creation, that there's going to be change over time, that it looks different at different seasons, that there's going to have to be made some decisions about how a plant grows and how it needs to be trained that'll completely change how the place looks. None of that is apparent. They're outdoor spaces. And they're not gardens. And you were talking about connection, Tom. Connection is different for every person who loves plants. It could be because you like to be outside. It could be because you want to be with plants and animals. It could be that you just want to create something beautiful with living plants. But it's all about how you relate to those plants and how they bring you into that kind of a place.
So lead with the plants, do what's right by them, and kind of follow your heart is what I'm hearing. It's kind of the guiding principle.
That would be there, and really also then be prepared for change. Be prepared to rethink things down the road. It's not going to, anyone who can claim to design a garden perfectly, but it's not like that. A garden grows and changes inherently, and it has to be rethought and revisited.
Yeah, well, that's the one thing I think all gardeners, no matter how rigid we might want to start off, you have to bend with the will of the soil, the plants, the drought, whatever.
And sometimes those relationships don't work. You don't really like that plant as much as you thought you were going to like it.
Right.
And so it's time to go off to the compost pile and start again. So that's
not being afraid to do that is a big thing for a lot of gardeners.
It is. I mean, that's the problem with the whole model of it as a home improvement project. Where you do it right the first time and you walk away from it. It's not that.
Yeah. Now, one of the things that I know that when I first heard about your approach, and I see the gardens that you've designed, and they're so beautiful. I mean, they're luxurious. They're filled with life and color and variety and pattern and texture, and all those things are there, present. My first thought was, what inspired this originally? It's like. I'm always trying to think of how would I do that, and one of the first things that came to my mind was, should I go out and look at plant communities in nature? But you also are not necessarily against the use of native plants, but against kind of the orthodoxy that's grown up around the use of native plants.
Yeah, we don't like to rote repeat, but we have a lot of time spent in the book talking about going to nature for inspiration, and that's where both of us come to gardening really from. We're not trained, Lauren has a basic horticulture background trained. I'm from geology, but both of us were attracted to gardens really just from the beauty of nature. That's how we came to it, as opposed to from art or architecture.
Right. So many of the gardeners that I know, whether they're doing whatever kind of garden they have, they're very passionate about it, and they feel it's their creative outlet. What is your role as the artist in your garden? You're advocating a really different way of thinking about it. You're still creators. You're still assembling these different things. What is your artistic input in the garden?
Well, we actually talk about this in the book. I think, a lot of people will say that gardening isn't even an art, but I'm not even going to go there because you could argue that ad nauseum, because who knows what art is really. But it's a lot like cooking, because you aren't always in control, but you can make yourself believe you're in control when you need that for your ego boost, and then it gets flattened, and then you get over it, and so it's a dance between kind of the chaos of the natural world and your hand. And if you get comfortable with that, it's one of the most fun things you could possibly do, because you're never ever 100% in charge, and you can relieve yourself of that.
Right.
Yeah, a lot of the
Letting go seems to be a big part of what your philosophy is
Very
all about.
much.
Yeah. A lot of the design part comes into trying a bunch of things and seeing the ones that work and the ones that don't, and making decisions, based on that. And you get more of the plants that really like you and like your space,
Yes.
and use them in groupings that will effectively recall maybe a beautiful meadow scene or a woodland understory that you experienced in nature, something like that. So.
Or not even in nature. It's just a feeling of abundance. It doesn't have to be naturally put together. It can be. Some people, that's not their thing.
Right.
So.
And we also go back to nature, just for general inspiration. Every region has, things about it that, have certain challenges and certain offerings. Here in Central Texas, we have a tremendously hot, long summer that's hard to deal with, and you have to plan around that. But we also have very often a tremendous kind of wildflower abundance in the spring.
Right.
And you can plan to, have something recalling that as well.
Right. One of the things I want to let the viewers know too is that there's a lot of good, just hands-on information in the book. There are lots of good plant lists where you suggest plants for particular kinds of spaces in the garden. So there is a strong philosophical bent to the book. Of course, it is gorgeously illustrated, but lots of good practical information that they can take if they really want to dive in to this plant-first philosophy. You give them a lot of tools to do that.
We did that, and we also, at the end of the book, there's a whole chapter that really profiles gardens that we think are plant-driven, all around the country. I mean, from Zone 4 to Zone 11, and even in Europe and in South Africa. So there's, a lot of different ideas to bounce off of all through the book.
The whole underscoring all of this though, and we just have a very brief amount of time. It all comes back around to the sense of connection, and as we all understand what the loss of that connection has meant for our relationship with the whole planet, then we know that this really is a way that we can come back around to something that's really important.
That's what gardens are for.
All right. Well, folks, I'm so happy that you are here on Central Texas Gardener. Congratulations on the beautiful new book, one that I know that our audience out there will love reading. Scott, first of all, the writing is always so great from you guys, but a beautiful book, one that will challenge you and inspire you. Thanks very much, Scott and Lauren, for being here. And coming up next is Skip Richter.
Hello and welcome to Down to Earth. This week's question regards frost protection. We're entering that season when frosts and freezes start to arrive. And we like to grow plants, sometimes plants that are not quite hardy enough for this area or just marginally hardy. If you've got a plant that you need to protect over the winter, there's a couple of options that you have. First of all, if you're just trying to extend the season a little, perhaps some flowers or vegetables, you can put a row cover over the plant or a blanket. That's something that's draped over. It's a spun-bound polyester product, or you can just use sheets and blankets if you provide some sort of support so it doesn't crush the plant. And that'll hold the soil heat coming up. Now, for plants that are perennials that you might cut back to the ground but might be a little marginally hardy for our area, you want to cut them on back to the ground after the first frost when the top growth is killed back, and then mulch the base of the plant well. That'll prevent a real significant temperature drop right around the crown of the plant. That's where the plant has to live and rejuvenate itself from, so you want to protect that. You can even put a covering over that if you like, and then put some additional mulch material on it. In most cases, that's not necessary. If you're wrapping some sort of a shrub in the landscape to protect it, keep in mind that plants don't produce heat. The soil releases heat. So to wrap a plant up like a landscape lollipop doesn't do any good at all, really. It helps stop some of the wind that might blow through and perhaps slow a little bit the loss of heat from the plant. But it's better to drape that cover over and let it extend onto the ground, put some boards or ropes or cover the edges with soil, and allow the soil heat to rise up underneath. That'll actually provide protection for the plant quite significantly. You know, most of our freezes here are not that hard and not that long. We'll dip down below freezing for an hour or two in the morning in many cases, and then it'll be back up again. So with just a little bit of protection like this, you can protect your plant quite well. If you add a light bulb or two underneath, these are the kind that produce heat, not the little tiny Christmas lights, but the bulbs that actually produce some heat, you can provide a few more degrees of protection, and perhaps something like a citrus plant or a fig tree on a very, very cold night can be protected with that. This week's featured plant is American Beautyberry. American Beautyberry is a native shrub. It does well in shade. In fact, it prefers to be in a little bit of shade. It produces these berries that in the fall really color up well. Then when the cold weather knocks the leaves off the branches, the berries really look good. In fact, they're popular in arrangements to cut the stems and bring them in. They're popular with some birds too. They're not at the top of the bird list, so they tend to last a while on into the winter before they're kind of picked clean. They come in a nice purple lavender form that's most common, and there's also a white form of beautyberry as well. Out in the garden, it's time to plant pansies and violas. They like the cooler weather, so go ahead and get those out. Check over your vegetable plants, because caterpillars are trying to get their last chomp in for the winter, and a little protection with BT will help them. And if you've got any shrubs that need moving, now's the time to do that. For more plant tips, or if you want to contact the Extension office in your area, visit the website klru.org/CTG.
Thanks, Skip. Now let's check in with John Dromgoole for Backyard Basics.
Hello gardening friends, welcome to Backyard Basics. The fall garden is a wonderful garden. Finally it's cool weather and we take in and bring out the cool season crops. The first thing I like to do as the soil begins to chill down for seed germination, so it's much better, is put transplants in. I want to stay on the schedule anyway, but transplants allow us to do that. Now there's all kinds of things, chard and broccoli and cauliflower and spinach and lettuce, all of these things would be going in right now, but usually as we get into the fall the soil temp's a little high, so we go ahead and do some transplants. Now one of the things that is real important with the transplant is to get them going with a little bit of fertilizer. So what I do is put a good organic fertilizer like this 464 right here. The higher number right there is the one that's going to stimulate roots. So I'll just put a little shaking of that in there and then I'll homogenize it into the hole so it's not directly on the root system right away. And then we take our transplant and go into the garden here. Look at those nice roots on that. That's what you're looking for in a transplant. Nice, white, healthy roots. That's a good indication that you're not going to have any problems with this plant and it's going to get off to a wonderful start. So, you want to be careful not to disrupt that root ball too much. Unless it's a massive root system, then break it up a little bit. So we go down there where that fertilizer is, we come into the soil, and then we just tap it around that, and we're off and running. Organic fertilizers, though, take a little bit of time to really make themselves available. So one of the things that I like to do when I put something like that in the ground is either to come in there with a fish emulsion type product, give it a little bit of feeding. The more leaves you can put on the plant, the faster the root system grows. The leaves are essential to that quick growth in the root system. So fish emulsion is a little bit of a nitrogen fertilizer, and that way we can get more foliage and a stronger root system right away. And when those roots hit that fertilizer that's down there, boom, they're off and running. So that's the best way to start this garden. And now we're going to be going into the winter after this. And so we may need some protection when that first frost comes around. You know how it is in late November. All of a sudden the freeze comes and then the temperature warms up again for a few weeks. So if we protect our plants during those times, we will have much better results and we'll get way off through the garden season. One of the ways of doing that is you take something like this PVC pipe. This one is a little bit over 6 foot long, and I drive a piece of rebar into the ground on each side. Then we slip the pipe over it, do it on both sides. We have a nice hoop. Put these in sequence of about 3 foot apart, and you can get a little device like this one over here that has the floating row cover on it. That gives us about 3 or 4 degrees of good frost protection. That's really critical because we can garden through much of the winter this way all around central Texas. Now on the night of a real hard freeze, we might put a piece of plastic over that too, just to really insulate it. But when we do that, we're off and running. And I can garden out here in central Texas from early in the fall all the way into spring when we begin to change over into our warm season crops. And that device is also useful with the warm season crops because in Texas we want to get in as early as possible, and sometimes a late frost comes along. So this device is useful going through the winter and then starting out in the springtime. Now if you don't have space at home, like maybe you have an apartment or a garden that is supported by something else, like the front yard or the cement sidewalk, you can put one of these earth boxes out there and have a nice vegetable garden in your yard too, even though you don't have space. Or sometimes we have limited sunshine, so we take something like this out into that area and we're on our way, even if we don't have space to do some gardening. So either way, you can garden, whether it's in a pot, an earth box, or directly into the ground. You'll be highly successful when you follow these techniques all through the winter. For Backyard Basics, I'm John Dromgoole. I'll see you next week.
Thanks, John. Be sure to check out klru.org/CTG for more tips and our weekly blog. Next week, we'll take another look at creating destinations with plant structure. Until then, I'll see you in the garden. Visit klru.org/CTG to learn more about today's program, upcoming events, and to sign up for our electronic newsletter. Check out John's how-to tips and visit Trish's Corner for ideas inside and out. Get growing at klru.org/CTG.